Hello, and welcome to Epidemiology 101. In this series, I will be going through the basics of epidemiology and then later expanding upon it to teach you basically how epidemiologists study outbreaks and fight them, and then be teaching you how these things can apply to a real world situation like the coronavirus pandemic. Epidemiology has become increasingly important in the past 2 years because of the first major pandemic since the Spanish flu, and it's my job in this series to teach you about how epidemiology works. So in this first episode, we will talk about what is epidemiology. And to start off, I'll talk a little bit about myself. I've been studying epidemiology for 8 years through a Science Olympiad event called Disease Detectives. And so the material that I will be teaching you will be related to that Science Olympiad event in a way, especially so that's good for any disease detectives that are watching this video. But it can also be applicable outside the event and just into the real world in general, because what's the point if it's not applicable to the real world? So getting straight into this, what is epidemiology? And so in quick terms, it's the science of public health, and we'll talk about what public health is in a later slide. The long-winded definition, and this is a definition you need to know, epidemiology is the study of the distribution and determinants of disease, and the application of it is to the control and prevention of disease. And those four bolded terms are four terms that you must know. And it also relates to the 5 W's of epidemiology, and those are kind of embedded, especially in the distribution and determinants section of this definition. So the 5 W's of definition are who, what, where, when, and why. And these 5 W's are instrumental in determining the source of an outbreak or a pandemic or an epidemic, and then in prevention measures to either stop it or prevent it from happening again. So first off, let's get into what distribution is. Distribution is person, place, time, or if you want to relate it to the W's, who, where, and when. So distribution covers your person, place, time triad in descriptive epidemiology. So descriptive epidemiology is just another name for that person, place, time composition, and it deals with those three characteristics. We will talk about descriptive epidemiology and then the other type of epidemiology, analytical epidemiology, in a later video. So getting into person. Person refers to any personal characteristics of someone who has a certain disease. So examples of this can be age, gender, occupation, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, anything that distinguishes me as a person from someone else as in terms of risk factors or anything like that. And so a common way that person-related data is organized so that epidemiologists can identify trends in data is through a graph called a line list, which you can see in the upper right-hand corner. It makes it very easy to see trends in personal data. So you could see if disease is more likely to affect older or younger people based off of gender, maybe occupation. And these things definitely do affect diseases. Like if you're looking at something like lead poisoning, maybe someone who's working in like more of an industrial environment will have a higher chance of getting lead poisoning. You'll be able to see that in a line list. Some things like that. That's the benefit of having person-related data in a line list. Secondly, place. So this describes the occurrence of disease by geographical location, and place is very important in determining the source of an outbreak. The graph that I've included in this slide is something called a spot map, and in particular, this is a spot map of a very famous outbreak investigation conducted by John Snow, and this particular map is from the 1854 Soho cholera outbreak. And this outbreak is so important because it kind of founded the modern field of epidemiology. And John Snow, what he did is he created a map of every single case of cholera in the area around Soho, London. And by doing that, he was able to determine that a lot of these cases were clustered around the Broad Street pump. And you can see all the pumps that are kind of in the area. They're marked in blue. And you can see how a lot of the cases are clustered around the one pump in the center. And so using that, Jon Snow was able to kind of determine that maybe that pump was the source of the outbreak. And then based off of that, he was able to target his intervention, which was to shut down the pump. And that eventually was enough to stop the cholera outbreak in Soho. Time. So time refers to when the disease occurred and very important for our calculations and studies. So time can include onset of symptoms, duration of illness, how long it takes someone to become ill once exposed, and basically just any period between something occurring and something happening, or a cause and effect. And so time is commonly expressed in line lists and epicurves. I'll go back to the person slide to show the line list, how in the line list, they're in the second column, there's data symptom onset. And then if you look at the epicurve, which is the graph on this slide, you can see how the whole x-axis of this is a time component. And this is very important because you can use this information to determine possible exposure periods. You can use it to determine incubation periods. You can also use it to determine the kind of spread of a disease. And that's very important in terms of, especially for modeling the transmission of disease. Now that's, when you get into modeling, that you're getting into some very complicated stuff, especially in regards to SIR model, which if I do decide to make a video on it will come way later. But yeah, that stuff it's cool. It's once you get through this kind of stuff, you start expanding into this whole realm of just application and calculations, and it gets really cool because you realize how everything connects to one another. And it's part of why I really like this subject. And so into the second part of the epidemiology definition, the determinants. So this covers the why and the how of disease. And so this generally includes causes of disease, modes of transmission, and potential exposures. And so things like nutrition are part of determinants of disease. So that could be the why. Nutrition would fall under lifestyle, but this is kind of like, so distribution is kind of like the who, what, and it's like if we go back to this slide, it's kind of that who, where, and when. And this is kind of like the why and how. So it's like you got the distribution, and the determinants is trying to figure out, okay, how has the distribution caused the disease, and how do those two things connect? And so into kind of the fundamental concept of differentiating epidemiology from other types of medicine, or it's not even really medicine, but just from medicine in general, public health versus clinical health. Public health is a population-based approach to looking at disease. So it deals with groups of people rather than individuals. So epidemiology is not treating an individual, it's not seeing an individual in a clinic or something like that. It's looking at population-based data and trends, and then discerning ways to, as a population, make the population healthier and reduce the transmission of disease. And so in the bottom right, you can see kind of a graph that that kind of details the differences between clinical medicine and epidemiology. So for clinical medicine, focus on the individual, lab tools for diagnosis, doesn't really form any assumptions because you're dealing with the one person. Your job is not to make assumptions on population-wide things. And they're not really involved in policy formulation. They can provide input, as they often do. Doctors often do provide input on the benefits on an individual basis, like in research stuff. But epidemiology are the ones who really formulate that policy and make the arguments for and against it. So what is disease? So we've all heard someone say that's not a disease, that's a condition, something of that sort. In terms of epidemiology, a disease is defined as any condition that prevents the body from working normally. So a broken leg is as much a disease as depression and Ebola are. if you're not functioning at your normal capacity, then it's a disease. Obviously, with the broken leg, you're not walking or running properly, you're not able to move as well. Obviously, with Ebola, you're probably bleeding in the hospital, but you're both not working to your full ability, so they are both diseases. So, final notes, that's it for this week. I'll try to publish a video every single week, and we can kind of build on this over the next 6 months. I am relatively new to recording YouTube videos and YouTube in general, so there are going to be some growing pains. It'll take me a while to get the hang of recording videos, editing them, getting them out, but we will look at the common causes of diseases and characteristics associated with those causes. So things like characteristics of bacteria, fungi, viruses, etc. And from there, we will move into more and more things, and we'll get into more transmission-based things, and then eventually we'll get into policy things. And so in the time between this video and the next video, if you're interested in the subject, do some research on the 1854 Broad Street Plum cholera outbreak to really figure out how John Snow used critical thinking and logic to found the modern field of epidemiology. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. See you next week.